In this movie and the next one, we will look at the different measurement systems that are available to us with our CSS properties. These systems are used with things like font size, width, height, and other properties associated with positioning objects in virtual space. So as you can imagine, these different measurement systems will be available to a lot of different properties inside of CSS. The two groups of measurement systems that we can use are absolute and relative. The main difference, without going into a lot of detail at this point, is that the absolute measurement systems are tied to an objective standard of measurement, while the relative systems have a standard of measurement which can shift depending on values associated with other properties. In this movie, we focus on the absolute systems and the options that will be available, and in the next movie, we focus on the relative measurement systems. Now, as I just mentioned, the absolute measurement system is tied to an objective standard of measurement. So what is that objective measurement? Well, that objective standard is going to be based on our system's display resolution. So essentially, it's based on what's referred to as a logical inch. So whenever we're looking at our computer screens, what we're seeing is collections of little pixels distributed throughout a grid. The density of those pixels on the grid is referred to as our resolution. So depending on the architecture of the computer that you're viewing the content on, will determine what this objective standard is. Now, this would be a great thing, but we end up having some different base resolutions for our different hardware. On a typical Mac computer, the hardware setting for resolution is 72 dpi. Now, dpi is pretty much essentially the same thing as ppi whenever we're talking about computer resolution. So what you end up having is you end up having 72 pixels per inch. So the computer is going to base all of the calculations with our absolute measurement systems off of this 72 pixels per inch, and then it does the calculations to translate between the different types of systems that we have available for us based off of the distribution of pixels per inch. So we can end up using inches, centimeters, millimeters, points, picas, and pixels. Now, of course, we've already talked a little bit about an inch, and that is that logical inch. Oh, and by the way, if we're talking about your standard Windows-based PC hardware, the resolution there tends to be set to the default of 96 dpi. So the next thing here is the centimeters. So that would be handy if you're trying to use a metric system. Same thing with millimeters for more fine control. And then you see your points and your picas. Now, most of you may be familiar with points already because you use that in any standard word processing program to control the size of your font. Well, with our points, there are 72 points to an inch. And for picas, picas are made up of points, and so we end up having 12 points per pica, or 6 picas per inch. And then lastly, we have our regular pixels. So as you can see, we have a pretty good variety of the different systems we can use. Now ultimately, you are free to use whatever measurement system fits the needs of your project. In practice, I have a tendency to use inches to control print output in the print style sheets, and to use pixels to position items on the screen, control images, borders, and sometimes spacing. Now, we end up having a lot more design control whenever we are using our absolute measurement systems. Now, of course, this is us specifying we want something to be this wide and stay that wide, and it will stay that wide. However, there is a distinct disadvantage because our absolute measurement systems do not scale well to user configurations. By that I mean if an end user increases the font size on their browser, because they can do that, it can cause havoc with the way that you have set up your entire design. Of course, there are some things that you can do to kind of limit how much impact that has, but overall, absolute designs don't scale well and don't scale as well as our relative measurement systems.